Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into one of the most famous and foundational texts in Western literature, Aristotle's Poetics. Now, when you hear the name Aristotle, you're probably picturing this ancient, bearded philosopher in a toga, just kind of gazing at the stars and pondering the universe. Well, honestly, I want you to completely scratch that image. Today we're going to look at Aristotle as a scientist, literally, a scientist who wrote the ultimate technical blueprint for writers, actors, filmmakers, and creators. If you've ever wondered how great stories are actually built from the ground up, consider this your masterclass. We're going to break down his work not as some abstract, floaty philosophy, but as a hardcore, practical manual on what exactly makes a great plot tick. Okay, so why do we need a scientific approach to storytelling anyway? Well, it all comes down to Aristotle's main obsession, the immense, real-world impact of drama. Just think about the hit modern TV show Scam 1992 for a second. After that series dropped, a massive wave of viewers literally went out and started putting their own money into the stock market. And the crazy thing is, if you watch the show closely, the script never once turns to the audience and says, hey, you should go invest your money. But the sheer power of the drama, the incredible performances, and the way the plot was structured, it totally convinced viewers that the stock market was this amazing path to wealth. That is the magic of a well-crafted script. It leaves a profound psychological mark on us without ever feeling like a lecture. And figuring out how to harness that exact power, that's what Aristotle wanted to teach us. So let's dive into this. Here is the roadmap for our masterclass today. We're covering 1. The power of storytelling. 2. The perfect plot size. 3. Why we imitate life. 4. The 3 rules of art. And finally, 5. What makes a true poet. All right, kicking things off with part 1, the power of storytelling. Back in Aristotle's time, pretty much any rhythmic script, which absolutely includes the modern TV shows we watch today, was considered poetry. And he knew that when it's done well, it grabs you and leaves a permanent mark on your mind.
Which brings us to part 2, the perfect plot size.
Now, to actually create that lasting psychological impact we were just talking about, you have to have structure. Aristotle was absolutely convinced that the single most critical component of any drama is the plot. But get this, it's not just about what happens in the story. It's about the literal, physical size of the story itself. He used this very precise, almost mathematical term for it, magnitude. Basically, magnitude refers to the specific length and size a story needs to be beautiful, impactful, and memorable. For Aristotle, finding that absolute sweet spot in your plot size, it's completely non-negotiable. If you get the magnitude wrong, the audience's connection to the whole thing just shatters. Think about the extremes for a second. If a plot is way too small or rushed, we simply don't have enough time to connect with the characters or understand the stakes, right? But what if a story is too big? Aristotle famously compared an overly long, bloated plot to a gigantic, monstrous animal, or this absolutely massive, endless fort. If it takes hours upon hours just to process the sheer scale of it, by the time you finally reach the end of this massively tangled plot, you've totally forgotten how it even started. The overall beauty and unity of the piece are completely lost, purely because our brains literally can't process it all at once. So, where does that leave us? Right here in the sweet spot. A perfectly sized plot is one that has a super clear beginning, middle, and end, and this is absolutely crucial, it effortlessly fits inside the audience's memory. You shouldn't have to struggle to remember the opening scene by the time the big climax hits. Hitting that perfectly balanced magnitude is what makes a story truly resonate. Moving right along to part 3, why we imitate life. Okay, so we've got the mechanics of the plot down, but what about the instinct behind the art itself? Like, why do we even bother telling stories in the first place? Why are humans so incredibly obsessed with copying the world around us? Well, this brings us to a massive foundational concept called mimesis. Simply put, mimesis is the act of imitating or copying life. Now, fun fact, Aristotle's own teacher, Plato, actually hated this. Plato argued that poetry was just a cheap, flawed, watered-down copy of reality. But Aristotle fiercely defended it. He pointed out that imitation is humanity's absolute primary, most natural way of learning. Think about it. From the time we're infants, we learn to walk, to talk, and to interact with the world strictly by copying the adults around us. For Aristotle, mimesis wasn't some kind of flaw. It was the entire structural foundation of human learning, and by extension, all human art. And here's where it gets kind of wild. Think about the psychological paradox of imitation. If we were walking down the street and saw a terrifying monster, or worse, a dead body, we would immediately turn away in absolute disgust and horror. We instinctively hate looking at those things in real life. But in art, if a super talented painter perfectly captures that exact same monster, or a filmmaker beautifully frames a highly dramatic death scene, we don't look away. In fact, we actually find immense joy and admiration in looking at those exact same horrifying things. I mean, we line up to binge true crime and horror movies, right? The beautifully executed imitation is what gives us pleasure, even when the actual subject matter is incredibly dark. All right, on to part 4, the 3 rules of art. So if poetry, music, dance, and painting are all fundamentally just different ways of copying life, how do we actually tell them apart? What makes a painting distinct from a song? Well, Aristotle said every creator uses 3 very specific tools to separate their imitation from the rest of the pack. Those are 1, the medium, 2, the object, and 3, the mode. Let's break down exactly how these work. First up is the medium. This just answers the question, what physical tools are being used to create the imitation? A painter obviously doesn't use words. They use colors, forms, and brushes. A flutist blends rhythm, melody, and harmony. And it's really interesting when you think about a dancer. They might not use words or a melody at all. Their medium is purely physical movement and bodily rhythm to tell a story. And finally, the poet or the writer uses words, rhyme, and language. So the medium is just the physical vehicle carrying the imitation to you. Rule number 2 is the object of imitation. This is all about who or what is being imitated. Aristotle argued that human characters generally fall into 3 basic buckets. If a creator imitates noble, grand characters who are morally better than us, the resulting art form is a tragedy or an epic. If they imitate flawed, kind of foolish people who are worse than us, people's weaknesses we can just easily laugh at, boom, you've got a comedy. And if they imitate totally normal, everyday people, just as we are, that creates realism. So the object you choose to imitate literally dictates the entire genre of your art. And the third rule is the mode of imitation. This is all about how the story is physically presented to the audience. Even if 2 writers use the exact same medium and imitate the exact same heroic objects, their art can feel totally different based on the mode. You've got the narrative mode, where a storyteller just tells you the story. Then there's the dramatic mode, where the author completely vanishes and the characters just act it all out directly in front of you on a stage or screen. And finally, the mixed mode, where the creator kind of blends it, sometimes narrating directly to us and sometimes stepping back to let the characters speak for themselves. And finally, part 5. What makes a true poet? This leads us to a massive pet peeve of Aristotle's. Back in ancient Greece, the general public started getting a little lazy with their naming conventions. Because they didn't really have a broad catch-all word for literature, they just started calling literally anything written in meter and rhyme poetry. Aristotle drew a fierce, very strict boundary here. He said simply using rhyme and meter does not make someone a poet. He vehemently argued that just because a medical textbook or a science manual is written with a catchy rhythm, it absolutely does not make it poetry. To really picture this in action, let's compare 2 famous figures from that era, Homer and Empedocles. Homer, the legendary author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, used rhyme and meter, sure, but much more importantly, he masterfully imitated life, built these grand, complex characters, and showcased incredible human action. That makes him a true poet. On the flip side, we have Empedocles. Empedocles was a brilliant ancient scientist who wrote heavily about physics, biology, and nature. But get this, he wrote all his science books using rhymes. The public called him a poet, but Aristotle firmly disagreed. Empedocles was a physicist, not a poet, because he wasn't imitating life at all. He was merely stating scientific facts using a rhythmic style. And that brings us to the ultimate, core takeaway of Aristotle's entire theory. True poetry, true art, requires the imitation of life. It's not just about a rhythmic structure or sounding pretty. You can have all the clever rhymes, the perfect lighting, and the best camera angles in the world, but if your work does not accurately and compellingly capture and imitate the human experience, it just has not been elevated to the level of true art. So, I'm going to leave you with a bit of a challenge today. Take this scientific lens we just borrowed from Aristotle and try applying it to the media you consume today. Think of your absolute favorite modern movie or television show. Ask yourself, how exactly does it imitate life to capture your attention? What is the medium? Who are the objects? Is the magnitude just right, keeping the beginning and end perfectly within your memory? By analyzing our modern stories through Aristotle's ancient, brilliant framework, we genuinely unlock a whole new level of appreciation for the science of storytelling. Keep analyzing, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.